Hi, it's Tom Jordan. Today I want to dive into the perceived injustices which we have witnessed and have been perpetuated over the past several years under the past administration and what the current administration can and will do about it. It's called lawfare. You probably heard the term, you probably witnessed it as well, going after political opponents using a variety of legal means, including the Department of Justice itself, maybe primarily the DOJ. What is your take on President Trump's pledge to end the two-tier justice system? You can comment in the comments section. I'd love to get your perspective on this. Do you have confidence that this is going to be resolved? Or are you like many Democrats, because their claim, from people like Adam Schiff, is that if Donald Trump actually holds these unjust but legally very powerful individuals accountable, that somehow he is the one that's committing lawfare. Is total projection. What do you think about that? And what about this person here, Pam Bondi? What is your take about her potential or her promise and what her potential is to shut this down? This nominee for Attorney General to head the Department of Justice. Do you think she will do the job? She's a former Florida Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Her confirmation, if it happens, is being slow walked by some of the Democrats, of course, but it could mark a very significant shift in DOJ priorities, emphasizing law and order, national security, justice for all. That would be unique, seemingly, comparatively with the past 4 years, without political interference, mind you. And she's got a record. Her record and her testimony, a pretty no nonsense. She says she's going to restore the DOJ's reputation as a nonpartisan enforcer of the law, restoring accountability in government during what many perceive as a deeply unjust era. I perceive it that way. And there's been just many, I'll get into a few of the examples after my conversation here with Dr. Matt Mehan with Hillsdale College. But, over the past 4 years, the use of lawfare, highly used to target political opponents, has transformed the perception, at least, of the United States from a constitutional republic to something uncomfortably resembling, as Dr. Mehan writes about, a banana republic. Yeah, who would have thought? But as I'm going to discuss with him, Dr. Matt Mehan, of course, he's the Associate Dean and Assistant Professor of Government, Graduate School of Government at the Hillsdale College's Washington, D.C. campus. Can justice be reestablished without devolving into these cycles of revenge? What's at the root of these revenge investigations and these prosecutions? Because over the last 4 years, America has witnessed the weaponization of the justice system to target political opponents and to ignore, dare I say, the attacks from liberals. Like, let's not charge them with anything. I've seen it time and again. Let's bring him in. Dr. Mehan is back with me. Good to see you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, happy to be here, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'll start off with Pam Bondi. She went through kind of a grilling there. I think she was very effective in what she was answering before this committee in terms of her, nomination, confirmation hearings and whatnot. I think she was good, but the accusation against her was, oh, so you're going to target your political opponents now. And, guys like Adam Schiff started naming individuals. Will you promise not to go after that person? And she's like, what are you talking about? I have to look at all the facts of anybody. So your sense of Pam Bondi, she's got a record as the Attorney General in the state of Florida. You think she means what she means by taking the partisan aspect out of the Department of Justice?
I do. I'm very hopeful. I think those Democrat senators were, rather than asking her to have justice be blind, they were saying, could you only look with your left eye? Uh, which
Yes.
is a trap, right? Like, no, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to prosecute crime as opposed to people, right? The famous show me the man and I'll show you the crime, the sort of Stalin-esque tyrannical use of law where you sick it on individuals for political fights. Um, that's that's not what she promised, and I don't think that's in her DNA. Like, that's not her political DNA. She has been a fair-minded executor of the law, and that's what she tried to give us today. So I'm actually, or today, I mean, that's what she's probably going to give us. I should say that's what she gave in that testimony. But
Yeah.
she's she didn't take the bait on that, but she also, I think, made a stress on that she's going to prosecute the law in good faith, meaning honestly and for the entire American people and for the sake of the constitutional system.
I didn't plan to ask you about this, but you mentioned the constitutional system and for the sake of that and inferring equal justice for all. How does this factor into these pardons, these preemptive pardons, do you think of that Joe Biden gave to his own family, members of his own family, not just Hunter, but his brothers and I think his grandkids and all these people involved, what many call Biden Inc., Biden Incorporated? It's well known in Washington, D.C. as that. But the other is the likes of Anthony Fauci and Liz Cheney and these preemptive pardons. Do you think those are going to hold? And is that, looking at the lens, you mentioned the left eye here, but is that blind justice, do you think?
Well, I mean, Biden just gave us a master class in the imperial or tyrannical use of the plenary power of clemency. It was just absolutely unacceptable, inappropriate, and not to be emulated. And I don't think Trump will do that either. Um, Blanket pardons for people who haven't been investigated and who are not sorry for their crimes is the exact perversion of the process and system of justice. Think about it this way: you can't give mercy if there hasn't been justice, right? And to
Correct.
hand out clemency without any establishment of a crime or wrongdoing is the exact inversion of what clemency is for. So that, to my mind, is a very important uh, sort of principle to remember. And I think it's pretty obvious to Trump world and to the DOJ and Pam Bondi, and I think to America that that's just disgusting what Biden did. I do think it's worth noting that by offering these blanket pardons to Anthony Fauci, Adam Schiff, Liz Cheney,
Hmm.
Hunter, all these people, by doing that, they now waive their Fifth Amendment right to self-incrimination. So they can
Hmm.
be brought up and called to testify under oath about these issues. And they don't have a blanket pardon for perjury under oath after Biden leaves office. So they need to cough up the truth. So I think that's going to be an important part of what follows is setting the record straight, even if not everyone can be punished. They can at least be dishonored by clarifying what you would like in a court of law. You can clarify in hearings under oath just what they did wrong. Um,
Mm.
and and shame is a second best that helps bring about order and justice when it's appropriate. And
Yes,
so
and that's a biblical principle. We talk about, shame. There can't be clemency or forgiveness without the recognition that justice, needs to prevail. I mean, you look at David. He didn't receive forgiveness until Nathan the prophet came to him and told him what he did, and David was sorrowful for what he had done and admitted it, and then he received mercy after that process had gone through. And this is, like you said, the inverse of that. You mentioned a very important word here, and that's perjury. And you've identified it as this root cause, really, of mistrust in the justice system because we have these high profile figures that ostensibly, objectively, have been lying under oath on numerous occasions. How does that factor in? Do you think of this unequal, I guess, this miscarriage, I guess, of the law within the DOJ, and have there been too many instances of perjury just being ignored, depending on which aisle you sit on?
yeah, so I actually think, and I've been arguing for a while and actually making arguments directly to people in the DOJ here in Washington, um, arguing that the way to move forward in a way that doesn't appear to be, as you put at the beginning, a kind of the sort of cycle of revenge, um, like a not a tit for tat political fight, but is actually honest and an attempt to restore justice after 4 years of tyrannical lawfare, um, is to focus on keeping good faith, bona fides, as the old Republican theorists Cicero and others used to say, right? It's in the law,
Hmm.
it's in the oath of the president and the vice president, and most oaths of office in good faith. that you'll uphold the oath. That violation of good faith, which is perjury and subordination to perjury, Section 18 of the U.S. Code, punishable up to 5 years. If you lied to a FISA court, it's 10 years. Thank you, Patriot Act. That's got real teeth. But I also think it is the place to prosecute because it's the lying about these little cabals, these political coups, these secret and conspiratorial miscarriages of justice, as you put it. It's the lying under oath that enables it, where you can, once called up, once there's suspicion, once you see a coordinated lawfare attack, you start asking questions, and then everyone just, oh, I don't know, and they just lie under oath. It's if that is no longer tolerated, then underlings will, when called up, will have to tell the truth or won't participate for fear of being caught in perjury because they know that the DOJ enforces that and they're coming for you. I think that'll punish some big fish, and that'll also scare off all the little fish who help do likewise because they realize they won't have the protection of big fish. So
Hmm.
I think it also has this knock-on effect of reminding everybody, actually, you're supposed to do justice in good faith. We're supposed to be candid with one another, and when we have opposition, we don't fake that political opposition under the lying guise of you're a criminal and I'm just prosecuting the law, which is what we just saw in the sort of bizarre kabuki theater of lawfare against Trump and others, and not just high order people. You've got lawfare against grandmas praying in front of abortion
Yes.
clinics, things like that.
Yes.
The FBI getting sicked on Catholic churches and school board meetings out here in Northern Virginia, where I am. The that all of that, I think, is corrected and suppressed in a strong way if you go after perjury as a sort of headline crime. And then you'll get the conspirators. You get people who lie and hide and use the law because the law puts a lot of people under oath, right? So you're not showing me the man and I'll find the crime. You have a crime that gets a lot of the worst men and women who do this kind of lawfare shenanigans.
Well, I think, I mean, you just mentioned a few things that had occurred over the past several years. You mentioned the targeting of Catholic churches by the FBI, by the Department of Justice. You mentioned the parents at school board meetings where Merrick Garland was, directing an investigation into some of them as potentially as domestic terrorists because they disagreed with the curriculum of what their kids were being taught. And they were, vociferously opposed to that kind of curriculum as if that's a threat. I feel like part of that effort, what allowed the Merrick Garlands of the last 4 years to do what they were doing, was the kind of the greasing of the skids by our political leaders. You had Joe Biden standing in front of the nation in prime time with that, dark red, scary background, announcing to the country that basically half of the country, Republicans, were the greatest threat of terrorism, essentially, to the United States. So there you go. You find the man, in a sense, in order to look for the crime. The man then suddenly becomes half the country. And I feel like that was do you feel that kind of allowed this weaponization, the narrative that was being put out there by this Joe Biden administration that allowed the FBI, the Christopher Wrays and the Merrick Garlands and everybody else to go after these conservative figures, private or public?
Um, I'm writing a piece right now, which I'll sort of preview in answer here. It's coming out in the next couple of days. But Biden was the oldest president. And Aristotle says that old men, when they seek to harm, they seek to wound. Whereas
Hmm.
when young men seek to harm, they seek to sort of mock and cajole and deride and bring you low, which equalizes you. But Biden's speech, the red speech, I think is what we really should all call it, the red
Y-
speech. Biden's
Yes.
red. It should go in the history books as the red speech because it was red in anger. It was Soviet style pogroms against the people. It was red backgrounded, and it went after Red America and the MAGA hat. So it's a red all over. Um, but when he did that, it was a call to wound half the country, go after them, hurt them, We're calling them domestic terrorists so that we can treat them like suicide vest bombers in Afghanistan and Iraq from yesteryear.
Mm.
That was the call. And that is a vile and tyrannical thing to do. And it really did send out an APB, all points bulletin, to his cabinet. Go after these people and hurt them. That's a big problem. It's just absolutely unacceptable. And I do think you can argue it on the level of justice, right? That it's unjust to use the law this way. We call it lawfare, but you can also use it on the higher level of charity, right? It was malicious.
Mm.
It was a really angry old man move. And it's ironically, Trump's not a spring chicken either, but he acts more like a young man. He
He
mocks people
does.
down,
Yeah.
but he
Yeah.
doesn't want to hurt you. He wants you to get back into the American project
Mm.
with him. He wants you to love him, but he also wants you to love America and love everybody. And that's a very different ethos, and I think it'll play out very, very much to our favor in restoring justice.
Well, the ethos matters because when after that speech, the red speech by President Biden, where he demonized pretty much half the electorate, there were immediate consequences to that. I think it was a call to action, not just from his cabinet, but also to Democrats across the country, because we saw
Right.
example after example of conservatives being attacked. Some of them were being killed. There was a elderly woman here in Michigan who was just going door to door canvassing for pro-life. She was shot in the back. She was in her 80s. She was not a threat, but because she was pro-life, she became a threat based on Joe Biden's characterization. There was a teenager, I think it was in Minnesota. He was 18 years old. And he was killed specifically because the guy found out he was a Republican. You got Marco Rubio's assistant being bludgeoned almost to death because he was a Republican. And all of this happened time and time again after Joe Biden's speech. So it was a call to action, and I've been called one of the greatest threats to this country. A terrorist is what I've been, based on my ideology of a Christian conservatism. Like, I have a biblical approach in the lens I look to through the world. I've been very recently, even after this recent terrorist attack in New Orleans, that I was a bigger threat than that terrorist by some of our viewers and some of the activists here in the state of Michigan. It's horrendous what has happened here. So we got this two-tier justice system, and I would say absolutely that is the case. Where the political allies align with one another, and they do provide this leniency for real violence that is occurring. We saw that in 2020 with the very violent riots across this country. And much of them were ignored, and they were supported by, the likes of Kamala Harris and these very well-known politicians on the left. Yet on the right, you have the going after very peaceful protesters in many cases, and you mentioned earlier the pro-life individuals, standing on a sidewalk praying, suddenly makes you a grave threat to democracy and all these different types of things. So you got leniency, then you got harsh treatment depending on your viewpoint. A lot of people in this country are very frustrated by that. What practical steps do you think that a Pam Bondi or Donald Trump can take to ensure that there actually is going to be equal enforcement of the law, at least over the next 4 years?
I do think they need to explain themselves when they prosecute their political enemies, right? Which they will. They're going to come after some of those people, and they need to sort of lay out, no, 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 right? We did this person and this person. One has nothing to do with our political lawfare issues, and another has everything to do with it. But we are not going to pick sides on that. Hopefully, there's actually some prosecutorial discretion that when one goes up who is a political enemy, another who, some white collar perjurer goes
Mm.
up in another case. I mean, I think that's a smart prosecutorial discretion question that they can use.
Mm.
But I also think they need to open the door of clemency at the back end of this, and they need to say that from the start. We're coming for you. We're going to be extremely strict, right? We're not going to give you any quarter on this. This is really high crime perjury. You can't do this. So we're coming for you, full extent of the law. If you come clean and are contrite and
Mm.
sorry, then clemency will be offered. We will commute sentences. We will restore you dishonored, brought back to zero. You don't have your political honor anymore because you were a dirtbag, right? You were a liar and a perjurer. So you have no perfidious through faith. You use good faith to get something illicitly. That's what perfidious violations of the oath are. No good faith, therefore no bona fides, no social credit. If you want to
Mm,
get cute, right? So we're going to take you to zero, but if you're willing to admit that you're at zero, we'll take you from -4, i.e., 4 years in prison, and bring you to zero with
yeah.
shame. But
Yeah.
the punishment will be the process. And if
Hmm.
you are not contrite, forthright, and helpful, and confess what you did wrong, right, in a good way, not in a sort of like fine, like maybe, or the sort
Right.
of that vague garbage where you're not sorry. I mean, this is what's
Right.
so awful about what Biden did with Hunter. Hunter's not sorry for anything. It's
No.
a blanket
No.
pardon. Fauci's not
Right.
sorry for anything. They're
Mm,
all claiming they didn't do anything wrong.
correct.
So that's the exact opposite of what clemency is. But real clemency is good. You
Hmm.
offer it because you say, "Look, I don't want to to take revenge on my political enemies. I actually want to restore us back to a debate about what's best for America." Right? So if you're really sorry, and very clearly so, and you sort of debase yourself, or sort of confess to the nation what you did, that's fine. That's why I also think they need to pick the cases that are very easily demonstrated without testimony that perjury occurred and that crimes occurred, because then it's not like you're torturing them into false confessions, right? It's actually like, no, no, no. All you got to do is admit to what everybody already knows, because it's clear on its face. And there are quite a few bald, sort of naked cases of injustice and perjury that we already know about and that you could go for. And I think
Mm.
that's one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, maybe look at those cases. I like the what you said earlier too about the loopholes. Like an Adam Schiff can't be forced to testify, and he can't waive his, was a Fifth Amendment right there. He's got to testify, and maybe he'll perjure himself there, and that will be accurately reflected in the way the Pam Bondis of the world, if she ends up being getting this confirmation, she can enact justice on that, and maybe grant clemency if Adam Schiff repents fully, is
Yeah.
very sorry, and publicly admits what he's done over the years.
Tom, one other thing about this with regard to, like, you were talking about the poor 80-year-old woman who was shot and all
Yes.
that. If you go after perjury, particularly, and lying to the government, tampering with evidence, that kind of the dishonesty crimes, if you go after those, playing with language the way the Dems and the left have done,
Mm,
where where trying to be pro-life is actually anti-woman, where speech is violence and violence is just speech, right?
mm,
All of this flim-flammery that causes all of this whipped up emotion that arms people to do insanely unjust things against their neighbor, against all custom, reason, and law, that will have a cooling effect on that, the way this polar vortex has cooled down everybody. It really will. And like, you can't play with language. I think the gender, the two sexes, I should say. I wish Trump and his people would say the two sexes, not two genders, but
yeah.
that's a fight for another day. But the two gender question, like his EO that put that into the federal code again, that's very good. Be honest. Things are what they are. Label
Yeah.
them what they are. Don't
Yes.
lie. That's very important.
Oh yeah. Language and definitions absolutely matter. And the perfidious. What was that word you said earlier?
Perfidious, the perfidious one.
Perfidious. I gotta write that down. Perfidious. I'm gonna start a rock band and call it Perfidious,
Yeah, the
and we'll play, the
perfidy,
local.
perfidy.
Per- I guess final question for you, Pam Bondi, related to her. Do you think she's going to be able to, in this environment? Obviously, there'll be pushback from the left, because I don't think they do want to de-weaponize the Department of Justice. They like that, and they're projecting on the Republicans as if that's what they want to do. But do you think that Pam Bondi will be successful? Because the DOJ is entrenched with this kind of ideology. I spoke with Mike Rogers before, he used to be in the FBI, and he says even the FBI is like 10 layers deep with this ideology, and they're protected by attorneys and whatnot. Do you think she will be effective in de-weaponizing the Department of Justice?
Effective. I think she will start the long process, draining the swamp. Right, it can't happen in a day. I do think she will be effective. I think we need to temper our expectations as to how effective. I do think it is correct that Trump needs more than one term to do this, which means he'll need a kind of heir apparent who will continue this into another 2 administrations to really turn the ship around and actually sort of clean it out.
Yeah.
That said, you have Russ Vogt, you have Schedule F, you have people who are much more prepared to have a fight with the civil service that's become uncivil and unserviceable. That is a huge addition to the sort of bag of tricks that Trump has, and Pam Bondi will have. And I will stand up for. I live in this town, and I know some of the DOJ lawyers, and they're like behind enemy lines in East Germany. Some of these really good lawyers in the civil service who
Yeah.
survive and hold on and should have resigned 1,000 times due to the outrageous things that the left inside the DOJ put them through. But they know that American justice requires that they cleverly and quietly hang on. There are still a good remnant of good people inside these departments, which I know the Trump administration, Doge, and others have actually been trying to get the names, find them, work with them. And so there's a much more clever way of going about this to use sort of every tool in the toolkit. So I'm hopeful that much will get done.
Yeah, I like that. I like that they're in there. I like that they're fighting the fight behind the Berlin Wall, as you reference. I'd like to see Donald Trump stand up there and say, Mr. George Soros, tear down this wall. It'd be wonderful, and it would start the process of humanizing this country once again. I always appreciate you coming on. You're a wealth of information. Thank you so much. It's Dr. Matt Mehan. He's Associate Dean and Assistant Professor of Government, Graduate School Government at the Hillsdale College's Washington, D.C. campus. So good to see you again. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, Tom.
Yeah, take care. All right. And stay warm there. It's, the polar vortex. It's hit us all. It's kind of a sign, I think, that maybe global warming isn't real. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I told you I'd bring up a few examples of some weaponization in recent years against conservatives, because that's really where it's been happening. You've got, of course, the most famous of them all that used up years and years, wasted years, and tens of millions of dollars is the Trump-Russia investigation. It's called Crossfire Hurricane, and it was all initiated based on the totally now discredited Steele dossier that was a Hillary Clinton campaign funded dossier. Like, she was behind the whole thing, and she colluded essentially with the Department of Justice and the FBI. And that investigation, of course, targeted Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. It allowed for the FBI to spy on him, and others in his campaign has spied on him in the Oval Office while he was president, with all these allegations that Donald Trump is a spy of Vladimir Putin and Russia collusion. And there was no evidence of that. There was no evidence of any wrongdoing, just that Hillary Clinton funded Steele dossier. And it did consume years and taxpayer dollars while damaging the public trust in the government institutions. You got the Michael Flynn prosecution, a total setup. They came in to talk with them. I think it was James Comer at the time, the FBI director, and say, hey, just sit down, let's have a little chat. Ask me a question. I think it was about, have you ever talked to this guy in Russia? And he goes, no, I didn't yet. And it was like the guy he was going to be working with in his new position in the administration. They used that as a lie. He didn't know he was being interrogated. He was the former national security advisor, and he was targeted by the FBI. He was coerced into a guilty plea on charges of lying to investigators, totally questionable circumstances. And now we look at these declassified documents. They reveal that the whole point, the internal discussions within the FBI was to figure out, let's find a way to make him lie so we can send him to prison. So let's trick him into a lie. That's their strategy. That was the FBI under James Comer, okay, the Department of Justice. There was the targeting of the school board parents as well. Under Attorney General Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice issued a memo instructing the FBI to investigate parents who are protesting at school board meetings against school policies. And they framed their dissent against the curriculum as domestic terrorism. Parents who are upset that their kids are being taught things that they disagree with, that don't belong in the schools. Like encourage them to change their gender. And how do you do that? It was a very chilling directive from Merrick Garland, and it was based on all this now debunked, National School Boards Association letter, like the unions are trying to get the FBI involved, and they acquiesced to that request. There's all these selective non-enforcement of federal laws on these left-wing riots in 2020, of course. I mean, many people were killed, they were murdered, and they were very lenient on those protesters. Stark contrast to the harsh treatment you can put the January 6 defendants, particularly obviously the 2020 riots. When you compare it to that caused billions of dollars in damage. They attacked federal property. They faced minimum legal consequences, and the federal law enforcement decided they declined essentially to prosecute those cases, but they were very willing to prosecute cases of people that climbed a wall on the Capitol who were not engaged in any violence whatsoever on that day, on January 6th of 2021. Some people should have been prosecuted when they were violent, of course, but many were just there, involved in a protest, and then they saw it get chaotic. But the fact that they were there, they were taken to jail and investigated. Remember the IRS investigating conservative groups, specifically conservative groups? Remember Lois Lerner? That was another example. The conservative groups applying for tax-exempt status, they were subjected to all of this unprecedented scrutiny and delays by the IRS. There's the selective enforcement of pro-life activists. Amazing how many pregnancy resource centers who are providing a lot of help to young pregnant women who don't know what to do. They were firebombed, and they were not investigated. So anyway, just a few examples of that. Of course, we can talk about the Hunter Biden and laptop versus the Donald Trump situation as well, this pattern of targeting conservatives. Okay, let's switch gears here. Now we're going to talk about the economy a little bit. In Donald Trump and what's happening right now in Davos in Switzerland, there's trade, tariffs, Trump, front and center in Davos at the World Economic Forum. The world is going crazy over Donald Trump's threat of doing what they do, these other countries, implementing higher tariffs. Art Laffer knows something about this, a former Reagan economist, of course. He knows something about the economy, brilliant guy, obviously. And here's what he told Fox Business.
When you heard that person at Davos say, trade wars have no winners, they're true. Trade wars don't have any winners. But let me also say that the losers don't lose equally. And when you look at the leverage here the U.S. has enormous leverage over these countries. Look at Mexico's Sheinbaum coming up and begging here, or Canada's Trudeau come down. The U.S. can really lever trade very, very much. Biden never did it. Trump understands how to do it, and he does it to get great deals, not only for the U.S., but for the world as a whole. And what I think he's doing with these trade situations is doing exactly what a politician and a good negotiator should do, is leverage that trade situation and get them to reduce their tariffs, their quotas, their non-tariff barriers, or get them to stop illegal importation. He's doing a great job on this and understands trade far better than any academic economist I have ever known, including myself.
Our headline on it was, President Trump's got world leaders worried about tariffs. World leaders are worried about the tariffs. And my reaction was, good, you should be worried. Because America's back in the driver's seat, and we're not going to operate based on you pushing us around.
Thank you. Thank you. Biden was wussy and all of this. I'm global. Blah, blah, blah. U.S. pollution of the atmosphere has been dropping dramatically. The place that it's going crazy up is China. Why should we be sitting there putting all these restrictions on us when the other people don't have those restrictions? When you look at trade, why should we be cutting tariffs and all that when these other countries are having much higher tariffs or are not trying to help us on the border in any way, shape, or form? Right. He did it in his first term, and he's going to do it now. And let me just say, if I may, Donald Trump's trade deals in his first term, all of them had trade barrier reductions, not increases. This guy, Donald Trump, President of the United States, thank goodness, is the most free trade president around. He just knows how to use trade for negotiation. He's a negotiator, and he's going to use that with enormous leverage and make us a lot better. and make us really prosperous again, along with the rest of the world.
Right. Democrats always want to hike corporate taxes, but then when you talk about raising a tariff slightly on imports, they act like the sky is falling when imports are only 14% of our economy. They're so disingenuous and stupid. Now, to your
but he even doesn't dig, and he doesn't even raise the taxes on imports. He uses it as a negotiation tactic. They come here and we negotiate much better deals. It's a good threat. And by the way, he would have to carry it through if they didn't. I mean, that's what a good threat does, is you can't just threaten without carrying it out.
Right.
But he's great at this, and I expect he's going to make us terrific economy.
Now, to your least favorite Disney princess, millionaire Disney heiress and face of the wealthy activist group Patriotic Millionaires, Abigail Disney piping up again. She isn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for President Trump and his billionaire friends.
So her group fired off an X, a post, saying, quote, 63% of millionaires around the world think the influence of the super rich on the Trump presidency is a threat to global stability. These millionaires say we must draw the line and tax the super rich if we want to save our democracy. So, Art, the really, really rich want to tax the super rich because there's some virtue in being really rich but not super rich. Can you explain this one to me, Art? Maybe you can help me here.
Yeah, well, I can explain it. Yeah, sure. The second generation Disney did not do Disney. She's an inheritor of this, and she's not the producer. What you look at the super rich like Elon Musk and like Vivek Ramaswamy, and you look at these other people, Zuckerberg and all who were down there with Trump, they actually did it. They made the world a lot better and made a lot of money in the process. And when you look at these people who want to tax the rich, my book, Taxes Have Consequences, which I wrote with Dr. Gene Sinkfield and Dr. Brian Dimitrovic, that shows clearly that every time we've raised taxes on the rich, the economy has underperformed, tax revenues from the rich have gone down, and the poor have been hammered. Every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, the economy has outperformed, tax revenues from the rich have gone up, and the poor have been benefited enormously as a result. These people don't know any economics, they also don't know how to create wealth like their grandfathers or their fathers did.
Yeah, Art Laffer, which is a brilliant guy, and he's right about all those things as well. I mean, raising taxes on the rich only hurts everybody else, and so it's been proven time and time again. So, we talk about tariffs. Markets actually have been really not that worried about these tariffs and what's happening in Davos right now. I mean, the markets are pretty good right now. The Dow is up as well. I'll give you the latest right now. The Dow is up 33. So, but the Dow Jones 44,336. Nasdaq down a bit today, 117. S&P 500 is down about 7 points, but still very strong. Why is that? And what is going on with the markets? That's what I want to talk about today as I get my notes pulled up here, because the return on investment, essentially, if you're investing in the markets, and it's like you think about, okay, how much is this investment costing me? It's much higher than it used to be. And you look at like, okay, so what is the actual situation with the markets right now? I'm looking at some notes that I wrote down. When you're thinking about why is it expensive right now to invest in U.S. stocks in particular, what I mean by that is that the price to earnings ratio is high. It's 4 times higher than when it was during Ronald Reagan's presidency, and it's much higher than Bill Clinton's and Barack Obama's as well. And why is that the case? Will this bubble-esque environment we're in right now lead to a bursting-esque environment down the future? I want to bring in Jimmy Plasky. Jimmy Plasky is back with me here on the program with EP Wealth Advisors. It's good to see you again. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. So what is this? So it was a very interesting article that I found in the Wall Street Journal, and it dealt with this issue of the markets being very expensive to engage in. And you read about it's more expensive now, much more than it was during Ronald Reagan's years. But we see the markets thriving. And so kind of break down, I guess, in general terms, what we mean by that it's the markets in the United States specifically are expensive right now. What does that mean?
Yes, the markets are expensive. When you look at what's happened with our economy, the U.S. economy, the last, we'll say 4 years, there's been some major growth. And that really, when you look at the economy as a whole, or we'll say the S&P 500, the growth that we've seen has really been from 7 major stocks, right? They call it the Magnificent Seven. Your Apples, Amazons, Alphabet or Google, Microsoft, Facebook or Meta, and then NVIDIA and Tesla. And you've seen major growth. I think it's 245% approximately in the last 2 years in those 7 stocks, where the rest of the economy has grown, or the S&P 500 specifically, has grown about 34%. So you've seen major growth in terms of price across the entire market, but really driven by 7 major stocks.
Okay, so there's some concern that some of the forecasts out there are suggesting that some of these U.S. Large cap stocks might actually deliver negative returns over the next 7 years. So looking out ahead, that's pretty concerning to a lot of people. And that means some of these investors might lose about 5.2% in their investments every single year. So looking at that, that's after inflation, of course. We've got to adjust for that. Is this a wake-up call? Should it be a wake-up call? Why should it be a wake-up call if that's the case for anyone still investing heavily in some of these overpriced, maybe overvalued stocks?
Yes, there's definitely a wake-up call, right? We are a global economy, and that when you look at these last few years, the U.S. economy has been very, very strong, and that large cap specifically has been the strongest. But again, as I'll say again, we are a global economy. Developed and international emerging markets have underperformed the last couple of years. That as we see this economy, the dollar, right, the strength of the dollar start to change, whether that's strengthen or weaken, but start to change, right, the global economy is going to change with that. And one thing I also want to state is as we talk about the large cap stocks, yes, they have performed. I've talked about that Magnificent Seven already, but mid caps and small caps have underperformed a little bit.
Underperformed.
Absolutely, right? Fixed income has underperformed. So not to sound cliche, but it goes back to that full circle of having that proper diversification. Yes, the last 5 years, if you invested just in NVIDIA, you'd be pretty happy.
Yeah.
If you invested just in Tesla after the election, you'd be pretty happy. But the world doesn't work like that, right? It's very, very hard and almost impossible to time the market, right? It's the timing of the market, or forgive me, the timing of the market that's impossible, right? It's the time in the market. It's weathering that storm that we have to be able to do. And 2025 could be a storm as we have a little bit of a pullback, right? 10% is not far-fetched for an economy to have a pullback in that direction. 20%, no one wants to see it, but that's not far-fetched. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know. If I knew, I'd be very rich and probably not working today, right? But that's why we have that diversification. Absolutely.
So let's talk about a little bit more about that, because you mentioned that the dollar is overvalued compared to some of these foreign currencies. Obviously, that's the case, and it's driven by the perceived economic strength of the United States. And I do wonder how much of the I guess the actual worth of the dollar ties into the amount of federal spending that we've incurred over the past, 4 years or so. But you mentioned a potential correction, 10%, maybe 20%. What will that do? I mean, it sounds like that will hurt. But in the long term, is that potentially what is needed to make our economy stronger?
Business cycles are important. Market cycles are important. It can't go up forever, right? So there has to be a pullback in the market cycle. Now, will it hurt some people? Absolutely. Those in retirement or closer to retirement might be a little bit more hurt than those that have 15, 20, 30 years towards retirement, right? That will have an impact. But again, I can't reiterate enough that the importance of the diversification in someone's investment portfolio, right? Again, fixed income's been getting beat up these last couple of years, right, since 2021. But the equity or the U.S. stock market has taken off. So as these markets start to move, will there be another sector or piece of the market that's going to outperform?
Yeah, how do you figure that out? I mean, as a financial manager and whatnot, and an advisor, how do you walk a client through that situation? Because it is kind of scary. I mean, maybe, you talk about diversification, different stocks other than those, top 7. But do you also look to maybe international markets as well?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, that has to be a piece of the portfolio. Yeah. The last few years, again, international's underperformed. So we've been more overweight U.S. large cap. It's made sense. People have made money that way. But as trends move, right, as laws change, as elected officials change, the markets are going to change. And we will absolutely be fluid with that change as well through EP Wealth Advisors and my investment team.
Yeah. Can I ask you a little bit more about maybe the dollar not being worth what it was, a few years back? Do you tie that as well? Do you think it is linked in some way, form, or fashion to the amount of spending that this government has done? And how does that relate to the overall strength of the economy?
Absolutely. I think there's a concern there. I mean, we've printed trillions of dollars. What's the number I heard in don't quote me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's $1 billion a day. Our deficit will grow in the middle of this year if we don't fix it. That's a concern, absolutely. But the peace of mind that we still have to have is the U.S. dollar is still the global reserve currency. There is still that strength there. There are other countries trying to change that, right, and adjust that. But as of right now, we have that strength. And so to use that to our advantage in terms of investors is only going to work.
You mentioned, these top performing, stocks, the Tesla, Nvidia, Meta, whatnot. They're also international companies. Do they perform though differently? Do you think in international markets than they do here in the United States, or do we know that?
One, I don't want to answer that. I don't 100% know,
yeah,
but
right.
as we talk about the economy, or those companies specific, they are U.S. based companies. So, right, profits do come to the U.S., so they are in the U.S. markets in that capacity.
Yeah.
But right, Facebook's one of the largest companies
Yes.
in the world.
Right.
Apple, one of the largest companies in the world. So they do have that global presence, absolutely. But the profits do come back to the U.S. at the end of the day.
Okay. I'm thinking about a guy who maybe he's about 55 years old or so, sometime in that range. Maybe he's like a radio host or something like that. And a guy like that, just hypothetically, and he's, maybe got another 10 years, 15 years in the working cycle here. Does someone like that take greater risks, or maybe becomes more conservative? And what does that look like, considering the fact that maybe the market in the United States is overvalued at this point?
Great question. That person should become more conservative, absolutely,
Yeah.
naturally, right? Because we get to a point in our lives where we've saved enough money where it comes time to spend it. And if that money's not there to spend, that's going to impact our lives. For a lot of people, that time is retirement, right? So the closer we get to retirement, the less risk we naturally want to take, right, with those dollars. And my recommendation is to naturally take that less risk, right? We talk about time horizons of needing money. That if your time horizon is less than 12 months, that money should be in the bank. You can get to it tomorrow. Once you extend that time horizon, now we can start to invest. And when we extend that time horizon even further, now we can naturally take a little bit more risk. Obviously, it's always up to my client's risk appetite, but naturally, when you can have your money invested longer, you could afford to take more risk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Not always the case, though.
All right. I'll let the guy know. I was asking for.
Pass it along.
I was asking for a friend.
I know a guy.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Jimmy Plasky, EP Wealth Advisors. Congratulations on the merging of the new companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Thank
great
you very
news.
much. Yes,
Good
big
to
growth
see you,
ahead.
Jimmy. Thank you so much. All right, we got some comments and questions. In fact, maybe Jimmy can help me out, depending on what the topic is. Let's bring him up. Cameron Harris is watching this one by one. Let's bring him up here. It is from Taz is back. Taz, pardons. This will not be a Jimmy Plasky question. Pardons have constitutional limitations. The first limitation is a crime must have been committed before a pardon can be given. How can this stand doling out a made-up term such as preemptive pardon? I agree with you. And in fact, that is what is going to be looked at. We got a lot of very smart attorneys and constitutional lawyers saying, listen, this is not at all what pardons were meant to do. This is not what clemency was about. And we just talked with Dr. Matt Mehan with Hillsdale College to say, yeah, this has nothing to do with clemency. The whole idea of a pardon is looking at somebody who is truly sorrowful for the crimes that they have committed, and they admitted they committed the crimes. They've been charged and sentenced for those crimes. At that point, you look at their case and you say, okay, this guy's shown enough, remorse, and let's pardon him or her. That's not what's happening here. These are preemptive pardons against people who haven't even been investigated yet. And to me, in my mindset, it says these people, maybe it's an admission of guilt, because the preemptive pardons go all the way back to 2014. We know in 2014 is when these very same people, a lot of them were involved in these overseas dealings in Ukraine and in Romania and Uzbekistan and in Russia and in China, working, presumably for the vice president of the United States at the time, which was Joe Biden, and they happen to be his family members, and they happen to be reaping in potentially tens of millions of dollars as well. So you can't look at that anymore. Can't look at that. Yeah, you're right. It should be looked at in terms of the constitutionality of those preemptive pardons. Thank you so much, Taz. Good to see you. Let's bring up another one here. It is from Harry Sakalian. Hi, Tom. Hi, Harry. While I agree with the professor's second best option of shaming these people, the problem is most of these people are shameless. Biden, Adam Schiff, etc. are good examples. Thanks, Harry Sakalian. You're right. They they project that they're shameless because they're not admitting any guilt in their alleged crimes. But I think what he means is to shame them means to actively do something that will undoubtedly cause them shame. And that would be if prison time is needed, if some type of accountability measures are implemented to bring that person to that place of what you call repentance or shame, then that's when you can start dealing with the issue of pardons and clemency. Everyone has the potential of being shamed. It just depends on to the degree that it's going to take to get them to that point. Sadly, some will go to their death. But I'm one that believes in, the consequences will even come after death as well. Ultimately, shame will come for every individual. It's more important to take on the shame now in this life where the consequences are far less severe. And then you'll find mercy after that. Thanks so much. Great comment. Appreciate it. Let's bring up another one here. Arlene Pearson. Hi, Arlene. Wonderful concept. Accountability for lies, perjury by our government officials and politicians would be helpful if legacy media would investigate elitists' lies equally and objectively and not assist in lawfare as they did these past 8 years. Arlene, it's always really good to hear from you because you always, first of all, you're just a nice person and you're very intelligent, and you always give some very good comments here. And I think this is a very salient point that you give. There's been a lot of collusion with the media. They have protected the ones they want to protect, and they've amplified the ones they would like to attack and go after. And that includes in the whole institution, I guess, if you want to call it that, the industry of lawfare, unequal application of the law. And that's what's been going on. But they have to do it, and I think back to Dr. Mehan's point, they have to do it by lying, and that means perjury. And that means that perjury needs to be held accountable. If you lie under oath, and that person who lied under oath needs to be held accountable, that is a felony. You are not allowed to do that. And too often, that crime gets ignored. Arlene, thank you so much. Last one, let's bring up here real quickly. This is from Peter Slayton. Hey, Peter, how are you? The Proficious Boys, nemesis to the Proud Boys. Yes. Thank you, Peter. That's funny. Yeah, the Proficious Boys. I love that word. It's the first I've heard of it. I'm not on the level of intelligence as a Hillsdale professor like Dr. Matt Mehan is. But I love having him on for one reason. I get to expand my vocabulary, and I get to think of some really cool names for my future rock bands that I plan to be a part of. Peter, good to hear from you, and thanks for your comment. Thanks to all of you for watching the program today. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. You can learn more about the program, TomJordanLive.com. Of course, we're on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts as well. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., streaming live, TomJordanLive.com.